Yeah, Agent Mahara here. Borderline personality, of course, X's, or in any family relationship, untreated BPD causes relational impossibility. So it can get way more complicated in family of origin, especially for the 13%. It seems more like it is now than 25%, but of what psychology calls the good enough mom. In other words, these people with BPD, 13% at least, the known causation, well, it's not exactly known, but the known causation is perceived abandonment, perceived attachment difficulty experienced by the infant, where mother's doing everything she possibly can, which I think speaks a lot more to a really highly sensitive temperament, and that no matter how much mother's doing the best she can in this smaller percentage of people who go on to be diagnosed with BPD, that it isn't the parent's fault or directly related to something the parents did or didn't do. It's really important to acknowledge that, but it still ends up being relational impossibility without treatment. So many the adult child of people in the 13%, or who had the good moms and the good dads, like in other words, in psychology speak, I'm not, that were really decent parents, with this perception based aspect of BPD, like how BPD comes about, they definitely have massive relational issues, like the adult child of somebody with BPD in the 13%. It doesn't really change. Like, there are good enough moms and dads that have done a really great job in the 13%. The 87% now, stats I've seen recently, are the ones who go through really adverse childhood experience, either have a parent that is got borderline personality or narcissistic personality or comorbidly both or something else, and or maybe two parents that are cluster B. So that's a whole different thing. And then one other thing I just wanted to say about this too is, in terms of causation, nothing is scientifically proven. So for as many people as will argue, like the APA, that it's a certain percentage heritable, they don't know that. It's not proven. So, and a lot of things that I've read in studies, and it's like, what study do you, whatever, but I try to stay away from APA studies. A lot of them, almost all of them, will say, no matter what they say about causation in terms of the heritability, which I think better studies I've seen at least suggest they don't have an answer to that. With this, nurture versus nature sort of argument, it's just really important to know that it's not proven. So that's number one. And number two is that BPD is not a brain disease, a brain disorder. Adverse childhood effects will affect the brain, and then there's neuroplasticity for those that seek healing and recovery that goes along with making changes at that level, as well as what therapy is designed to help people with. BPD in families, when people are untreated and remain untreated, whether in the 13% or the 87%, it still becomes a relational impossibility. And I guess one other thing I wanted to pop in here about was, I had a commenter recently, and I'm not sure if it was a mother that was blaming her children or not, to tell you the truth. I don't want to say that I would know that. I couldn't know that. But anyways, they thought that they better refer me to one of the APA's best, big pharma funded studies, because they're not biased at all. So they put a link in, and I went and looked at it. I read it, and it is one, well, I don't know, there could be many, but it is rare in terms of the fact that it was a study of studies, so to speak. So that gets even more remote. You can't replicate that. You can get the same conclusion of ideology. But in this study, they were musing about, percentages of possibility of onset of BPD in adolescence, which I think most people in mental health profession in this area, BPD, all I've really read that has credibility from all kinds of pioneers in the field of BPD is that it's early, infancy, toddler, early childhood onset. But the thing is, it's not like people always know what's happening for a child when they're 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, and it may well come to fruition or be seen much more in adolescence. And then there's two issues going on there, because a lot of the mental health profession, although more and more there is going to be some for parents that take their kids, there's going to be some treatment at younger ages. Whether they would have BPD or not can't really be established at those young ages. So, or it seems to still be limited. But so there can be some intervention and help for the parents in situations. And so there's a lot of people who work in that area. And then there's also the fact that there's just no established facts that indicate that the onset would actually occur in adolescence, though the major symptomology and beyond would be observed, the relational difficulties, behavior, etc., would be observed probably more or less starting in adolescence. But this is where BPD and the treatment of it varies in different places. There are some in psychiatry and working with and pioneering things that I think matter, but with the big pharma hegemony thing going on. But they're working now more focused on teens, but they still don't like to diagnose it till somebody's like, I don't know, 17, 18, maybe 16, 17, 18. But rather they'd prefer to diagnose it between like after 18, because adolescence is a time when kids are growing and lots of mood things and all kinds of things, can happen. So acting out and this and that. What happens in the difference between people with BPD and relationship, being in any relationship type with a person with BPD? So whether you're the significant other, whether you're the favorite person and not the significant other, whether you're a sibling, whether you're an adult child of somebody with BPD, all these different familial, different relationship types. What happens is not to say it's all the same, but there is the basic relational rupture within BPD that is not going to make it much better for family members than it's going to be for the partners. And of course, when you're with somebody with BPD and you're the significant other, what you are experiencing is what began in the family system, in the family of origin, except for the 13%, that's different. The fact is, so what happened with the parents in the beginning, and or what went wrong in attachment and with the abandonment wound, etc., and what all that creates, and then the arrested emotional development by the age of 2, means that maybe not in young childhood, but various different ages, like it could be 8, 9, 10, or into adolescence. The relationships in the family of origin, which is more often than not, a dysfunctional family of origin with at least one cluster B parent in the 87%, and a lot of adverse childhood experience. So there's going to be tension and there's going to be all kinds of relational difficulties. And the emotional arrested development means that people with BPD, unless they seek significant treatment and or all the way years to healing and recovery, that's what it's going to take to unlearn the infantile defense mechanisms that were adapted by a young infant to toddler to survive. And that is on a biological level. At first, survival is threatened, and the original split happens back there. And the thing is, because children have to put outside, infants have to put outside themselves when there's affect synchrony and no, misattunement and not correct, mirroring isn't happening. It puts a child into a biological state of fear of survival, literally. And so this is what gets ingrained in people with these experiences in childhood, and then early childhood, and then the arrested emotional development, and they don't go on to learn more. They don't go on to be able to relate better. So I work with lots of clients who are, where the child and or the adult child is somebody with BPD or NPD or comorbidly both, because the skills aren't there, the emotional intelligence isn't there, the tools aren't there, the self isn't there. So these are people that are absolutely untreated or not significantly enough treated to be into the work of finding self, etc. So there's all these different relationship types, all of similar experiences had in all these different relationship types. And people with BPD, either, especially with a parent who's cluster B, BPD, NPD, whatever the case, they will either remain enmeshed, remain in that childlike role of still seeking what they never got, the parent they never had, after the parent, if the parent's still alive, and depending what age they are. That can go on well into somebody's 30s, 40s, 50s, as long as the parent is still here. And so they're still enmeshed in a colluded way in the family system and the dysfunction. And often they don't get treatment. But I walked away from my family of origin. I had to, and this is before the internet, no contact, books, all that. I just knew that I still have to do the video maybe on what was it, because there was a seminal moment when it became really clear to me that I had to do that and why. And it wasn't long after having read the book Toxic Parents by Dr. Susan Ford, which is an excellent book because it opened my eyes to, like, wait a minute, you mean it isn't just all me? Because no, it had a lot to do with a narcissistic, dysfunctional family of origin in which you can grow up believing you're the one that's to blame for everything if you're the scapegoat. So there's all these different realities about BPD, and then there's also all these different relationship types. So if they're not enmeshed, if they don't remain enmeshed in the family dysfunction and system, then they're going to end up with an estrangement. And maybe not from all family, it depends. But those relationships are going to be very incendiary. They're not going to be calm or peaceful. They're going to be highly conflictual and pose people all kinds of difficulty. But then there's all these people writing all over the internet, as is their right to do. But they have whatever experience they have with a person with BPD in their life. Not saying there aren't themes, but what is this idea that, wow, she did this and she did that, because it's mostly that, right? And then it's like, and then she was just acting psychopathic. Well, where's the expertise for you to know what acting psychopathic really is? Why are codependents doing this? Why are people writing this all over the internet? Now, I know the AP and the pseudoscience of psychiatry, which is what it is. It's unproven. It's ideology only. And I just want to reiterate, I don't have any skin in this game. I do not have BPD. I do not care what people think about that. But these people, this is the most stigmatized, vilified reality of people suffering. And yes, they make others, they hurt others. People suffering that there exists in the frickin' world. So I'm starting to question that, though I don't question the reality that people with untreated BPD are going to really devastate people. There's no doubt about that. But then back. And I've seen some professionals that write online, and maybe some couple of retired psychologists. One I really like to read on. I mean, he gets asked a lot of these questions, and he just outright states, like, I don't know if I could ever get in touch with the guy. Maybe I could read one of the responses I saw recently, where he's saying the same thing I'm saying. It's so vilified now. It's been blown up away from so many of the known facts that people are just adding to it in ways that are gonna muddy the waters in the picture, probably more for the individual who's trying to figure it all out, but who really needs to heal themselves more than figure out the borderline exactly. Not everybody with BPD hoovers, nor does everybody with BPD ghost, But all of this contact, no contact, broken contact, staying in contact, getting back. I mean, and I have clients right now, and no disrespect to anybody. Like I've said before, I'm helping them strategize on how to get the ex back. And the ethical point for me there is they need to do what they need to do. It's their choice to make, and then they'll have to see how it goes. And I have never seen that work out, and I always say that too. Oh, hey, Tanya, fellow Torontonian. Happy Tuesday to you too. I hope you had a nice Thanksgiving. Because, for those of us, like, unless we're Canadian, nobody would know that yesterday was Thanksgiving Day for us. At least, Cargirl, your mother told you that when you were first born, she and your aunt and your grandmother were around my crib, and your mother was a new mom, freaking out and was overwhelmed. I wonder if I picked up on that. Oh, well, yeah. When moms freak out and get overwhelmed, infants get distressed. Might have had something to do with it. You change your, oh, you think you need to change your Google picture. Hey there, Rob. I remember when I used to read stuff about BPD from, oh yeah. She used to vilify BPD and also emasculate codependence. Well, and I don't think much has changed on that front. And while she might not be working with clients anymore, she's still, I think, on a website somewhere. And to each their own, is all I can say about that. But I just think it's really important to say a little bit, at least, about the relational impossibility of people untreated with borderline personality happens because, well, except for the 13%, in the 87% with adverse childhood experience, etc., they don't ever get a chance to know who they are. They don't learn how to relate. So it's going to be a relational nightmare of the dichotomy of all good, all bad. And that happens to an infant at a really young age when, even if mother might be all bad, okay? Or when mother is sometimes doing what's, some of the good stuff, like changing diapers and feeding, etc. But mother is sometimes maybe not really attuned, but other times super not attuned, and Alan M. Shore's affect synchrony comes into play, and the attachment difficulties of all this. And so it's like that beginning, if it's not all one way, it's too much for an infant to handle because infants need what they need. And then if it becomes intermittent, the split happens at a very young age when this is going on, because if good mom shows up one minute and bad mom shows up another, the infant has to externalize that. The infant, and I always refer back as a way to understanding this in a more simplistic way is the way John Bradshaw talked about mother as the original face, that original face as the world. And that if mother is mirroring her anger to an infant, the infant has nowhere to, not good, doesn't know what to do with it. As Bradshaw defined it, the infant literally sets aside the anger. In other words, it externalizes it, gets parked beside. And this is what happens to people who go on to have the emotional arrested development before by the age of 2. Everything is just externalized, set aside, because it's infantile defense mechanisms. It's the only way that child can manage what's going on for an infant or a toddler, more so an infant and into a certain age, is definitely all on a biological level a threat to survival. And I'll quote Melanie Klein again, object relations theory is abandonment difficulties or woundedness and attachment difficulties, quote, causes psychological death of the otherwise burgeoning authentic self, unquote. That's pretty clear. And this was all based on a lot of research done. I think it was back in the 50s, or it could have been even the 40s. I don't know. But that doesn't mean it's in any way irrelevant or that it's been replaced with anything more sophisticated. I think object relations is still one of the best. It's not the only, but ways to look at this, explain it, and understand it. From Melanie Klein to Dr. James F. Masterson, seminal work and had a whole institute, but all dedicated to the understanding of object relations and cluster B, but specifically BPD and or NPD. Lauren, do you think that BPD mothers could cause BPD in a daughter? Yes. I don't think it happens. If there's a lot of treatment, right? A mom with BPD can probably do better if well treated. But if untreated, yes. And what I believe more than anything, and it's very substantiated out there, and many mental health professionals believe more than say others do, is that it's not about it being genetic or inherited. It's really about this most necessary process in the beginning of a child's life. There's a lot of things that people don't understand about BPD, with all due respect, that can happen within borderline personality, because they're not all the same. And people think, oh, if they do thing A or thing B, they have to be narcissists too, or they have to be this, or they have to be a psychopath. Or now, I always wondered if a BPD feels like intimacy is actually revolting. So since they feel childlike, or is that a narcissistic thing? Well, here's the thing, right? You can't know what a person with BPD feels, and they don't all feel the same thing. So I don't know that they think or that they feel that intimacy is revolting. There's massive issues with intimacy, but I don't know that it's that they think or feel it's revolting. And if one person with BPD does feel it's revolting, the next person won't have that feeling at all. Lauren, if you think you have BPD but have not been diagnosed, and people therapists think you are weird for bringing it up, what would you do? Well, I guess, and this is hard, right? You have to find somebody who knows more than those people, and you have to find somebody who can give you an assessment that would be broad enough to either, because maybe there's so much going on. I don't even want this is just going to be more controversy I don't want to get into right now. But between the diagnosis, especially in females, of anything on the autism spectrum and BPD, there's a psychologist in Australia who's got a thesis that most women with BPD, this is her thesis, most women diagnosed with BPD are actually on the autism spectrum. Could it be? I don't know, what your challenges are, what your difficulties are. Could it be that it doesn't fit BPD? Could it be that it's something else? Could it be that you're a quiet borderline and that it's getting missed? Because, what I'm hearing from a lot of clients, and what I'm even hearing a lot on this channel, is that it seems like psychiatry doesn't know how to do its job anymore. Like, I don't understand what's all the confusion, and I'm not saying this to you, right? But why can't you get either told that you don't fit for the diagnosis, or diagnosed with what might fit, or if you really believe that you might have BPD, then how these people try to assess you would be my question. Because, a lot of people with quiet BPD are not getting diagnosed, by the way. They're just still too many clinicians out there, and especially in psychiatry, that are looking for classic. Well, there's tons of confusion out there, and a lot of lay people, never mind all the professionals out there that are making it worse. A lot of lay people online are making it horrific. And to the point where it's just, it's just going to be whatever everybody thinks, which that could be problematic, I think. I don't know. Joey said, AJ, I do remember that my ex, sometimes when she was in a bad episode, you do remember that your ex sometimes when she was in a bad episode, but coming out of it, would say that she didn't know what was real or not. I don't recall that did it all, but it did sound dissociated. Well, there is dissociation in BPD. And then there's all the things that professionals have to delineate and parse that people keep running over all over the internet because they don't have the expertise. Otherwise, what would we be doing? Diagnosing somebody with schizophrenia? Well, they're doing this now too. Instead of BPD, or what's the difference between bipolar and BPD? I don't know what's going on out there with these psychiatrists diagnosing people. And Jane said, I feel quiet BPD seem. Oh yeah, okay. like schizoid or extremely avoidant at times. Again, confusion. The lines are blurring. Well, quiet BPD is a part of borderline personality. It has nothing to do with schizotypal, schizoid personality, or vulnerable narcissism on the face of it. Not that there aren't variants between people that could be comorbid BPD, NPD, or vulnerable narcissists, but this is what people out there who don't know what they're talking about keep forwarding and or writing about and or doing whatever they're doing. And more people are just lapping it up all over the place. So I don't know, where's the facts? I'm still always looking for the facts. I'm not in favor of pathologizing human beings. Lauren, yes, I agree that I feel like therapists are not acting with decisiveness. I have gone through a lot of therapists, and sometimes does not feel like they have much courage of something or something. Yeah, well, I really can't speak to what's going on, but I just know that for way too many people, getting diagnoses is just getting more and more ridiculous. Or like there was a person on my last live stream who had 5 or 6 diagnoses, and it's like, I don't think that's correct either. Like I don't know because I don't know the person, but I think people should question those things. Definitely. I like that, Joe. To Derek, you speak fluent Australian. I kind of do too, in a sense, but I've forgotten probably half the strain I used to know. Jane, yes, that's what I meant. It's like apparently people always have at least 3 traits, often more. It's too complicated. Well, there's something fundamentally. BPD traits is an interesting thing because now they're basically, I think, trying to use the 5-factor model of personality, which I don't know that that's really going to be more helpful. But the BPD traits, people have to remember, are human traits. So we all have human traits. We all have the human traits. And the difference being, as the wisdom of the pseudoscience of psychiatry says, the frequency and the intensity of those traits. But more to the point, I think it's more to the point something that could be described totally differently when people have a certain core woundedness. Tanya, AJ, you are truly, thank you. Tanya, you keep it 100%. Keep it real. It's stupendous in a world that is full of smoke and mirrors. Oh, thank you, Cargirl. Jane said there are people out there, who think codependency is incurable. I find that irresponsible, to be honest. I know there's many different takes on codependency, and as I said in a recent video, there are mental health professionals out there who want to. There are just people out there in general, as I've seen on blogs, they want to refer to codependency as codependency personality disorder. That's another possibility of what the APA might do with it in their frickin' Bible, the DSM of like everything not proven. But basically, codependency is much more understood now than it probably was in the past. And I think it's really important that I just don't like the pathological model of things. I don't like it with all of the APA. So other than that, that's all I'm saying. Yeah, which way is it going to go with codependency? They're going to just keep leaving it alone? Like, I hope they leave CPTSD alone too. Or everything gets more pathologized with, I'm just very anti-pathology. That's what I am. Not but anti-pathology and anti-theories and ideologies being put forward in a dishonest way as facts. That's what I object to wholeheartedly. People need to research this more, especially if someone you care about or you love or has a diagnosis across in mental health and psych meds, and people need to advocate strongly for themselves. Well, thank you for that, Car Girl. Tanya said, yes, I did read that. Thank you very much for that. Lauren said, I don't need a diagnosis, but it would be great to just get better and out of toxic relationship. Wish that there was a way to get myself out of it. Well, and I'm sure, yeah, there are ways, and maybe you could find somebody to just work with that could help you with that, because that's different than if somebody's seeking a diagnosis, right? Jane, I'm wondering why it's such an impossibility for many people with BPD to talk openly about their issues and work constructively with their partners. I've had that both with family and relationship because they don't know themselves, because of that arrested emotional self. And without going to therapy to address that, learn about that, find the lost, authentic, otherwise self that was burgeoning, pick up at that place there, which is making it sound oversimplistic, but then have that self, first a container of self built outside of self to be able to internalize for people with BPD, and then to do some of the healing work is not so unlike inner child work for others, but there's a lot of other foundational work to do first. So people with BPD don't have the awareness. They don't have, and if they have some awareness, they can have awareness up here sometimes, but it's fleeting. And then it's not awareness they can act on to change anything. So the very things you're saying is like it's impossible for them to just say, like what they need or check something out with you, because they're going on such triggered, then huge emotional dysregulation and a ton of feelings that they don't understand, that they're trying to externalize as fast as possible, that they don't know how to cope with. So they don't, unless and until significant treatment, and DBT can help with people managing this and getting better at it. But again, until somebody corrects me if I'm wrong, it's not a recovery modality in its totality. But the thing is, they don't even have, I think some of that requires emotional intelligence that people with BPD won't be able to have until and unless they get significant treatment. So they don't have a self from which to be aware of all of these feelings that are going on that cause all these reactions and that they externalize all over everybody. Because, like I think I alluded to in a video before, if they knew what they were doing, if they could figure out why they were doing what they were doing, if they had any awareness, if they knew themselves, they would want to stop it in a heartbeat. But they don't. And that's what continues to make it so painful for them and for people closest to them, especially untreated. Well, thank you for that, Tanya. That and you and Rav have been talking back and forth. B. Blueberry, is BPD more genetic or nurture? Well, we don't have a 100% answer to that, but in my humble opinion, it's more environment. An environment might meet with something else. I don't think it's genetic. And then, of course, neuroplasticity in the modalities of therapy can change the brain, can change anything like in that realm. But there's no settled science. There's no science on that whatsoever, actually, that is precise or that they've replicated or proven. And you said my ex's daughter is diagnosed with BPD, and I think he is too. Well, and that happens a lot, but it doesn't mean it's genetic or being inherited. And you know something? The argument actually of the pseudoscience of the American Psychiatric Association interestingly shoots their narrative in the foot as they now try, without science, to ascribe heritability percentages versus environmental things to people with BPD, when they say they've always said so a sensitive temperament in people with BPD, so when they're born, and we know now more about how a sensitive temperament gets created in the womb, etc., and the neuroscience of it all. And so what the APA has always said is that a sensitive temperament, for BPD to occur, for BPD to be diagnosed, the American Psychiatric Association says that a sensitive temperament, which they believe people with BPD have, has to meet with an invalidating environment. So, Tanya, yes, I think social media platforms may bring the demise of a real and true diagnoses these days. Well, yeah, because real and true diagnoses, when they're not screwed up, happen. Mental health professionals, and specifically more often than not, but not always exclusively, psychiatrists are supposed to know what they're doing, right? And they're supposed to be, at least I think, somewhat in the lead of being diagnosticians? And to what degree do you think that the APA is being affected by the bias of big pharma in even the diagnoses? I don't know. These are just questions. I love that you are anti-pathology. People always want to put others into boxes. Yeah, well, I don't. And I really don't think it's necessary. And people are doing it all over the place because they have an ex with BPD or something that, and they'll claim like they're fine now or maybe not, depending where they're writing or whatever's happened to them. And the pain is really real. But all the things they'll sling at the person with BPD that they couldn't possibly really factually know. But, people just, going on their experiences and saying things. And I don't know. Those boxes that aren't well defined to begin with across the internet start to just exponentially blur one into the other, into the other, into the other, to the point where if you want to talk about BPD or NPD or dependent personality or OCD, like the personality disorder variety of it, or schizoid or schizotypical or schizotypal, sorry, or what's in cluster A, paranoid personality, these things. Well, it's all just becoming one bucket of that's what my ex was like. People get really hurt and people are really trying to figure out why. And so often it goes back to codependency, and the answers lie within them in their wounded inner child, not with vilifying and trying to put everybody with this, that, or the other, or cluster B into like some huge bucket of everything. Tanya, sometimes moods and feelings are just that. Yeah, you know what? Sometimes moods and feelings are really based on what human context, what's going on in your life, what happened 10 minutes ago, what's going on in your day, right? It's not always the extreme, and that's the thing about the APA and the pseudoscience of it all that I see is that they make no allowance. They do not include in any of their speak the human context of things. Like, oh, depression. If you're depressed, the last thing you should probably do is go to a psychiatrist or that's going to have to be clinical depression. What does that really mean even? Because the thing is, lots of times people are depressed because of situations in their life in the human context in which maybe anybody or most people would find themselves depressed until and unless whatever's happening, going on, being felt, whatever the case in the human context, gets resolved. So yeah, sometimes a feeling is just a feeling, but not to psychiatry anyways. And by the way, the ICD-11, which is more the world manual and outside of, the APA's stuff, which is subsumed Canada, which I'm not happy at all about. The ICD-11 recognizes CPTSD. There's pioneering programs being set up in Scandinavia, places in Europe, where they're not even calling it BPD or NPD anymore. And yes, they are taking on and working with people with NPD and getting somewhere. So obviously those people have to want to be worked with. But there's just a lot that goes on. And the ICD, as far as codependency, I don't know if they've included that. But so I think too many people are North American focused, North American centric, whether we live in North America or not. But I've certainly learned, and not just recently, but even more so, look to the rest of the world and what they're doing, because the agendas in America are just too obvious. Everything is privatized, everything is for profit, and that's what they're after at the end of the day. That, I'm not saying every single psychiatrist, but, and you said, yeah, sometimes moods and feelings are just that. There are real-time struggles for real people who suffer. They need help, love, and understanding. They do not need supposed experts to confuse it all. That's true, but when people have certain kind of woundedness in childhood, which could include codependency, besides BPD or NPD, sometimes, depending on the severity of the issues, right, then love and understanding sometimes can't permeate them. But otherwise, I totally hear you. And Jane, oh, okay, well, thank you, but I guess, but, you know, obviously, probably that person is withdrawn now and going to, it'll be all my fault. You know, that's how it goes. Nothing I can do about somebody else's perspective. Who obviously didn't want to engage in an open dialogue, sort of mutual reciprocal way as I did, because they just kept doubling down, and I don't know what the point was, and I wasn't taking it personally in the first place, and there you go. Oh, thank you for that, Tanya. No, I'm not a social media climber. I hate frickin' social media. That's why I find sometimes live streaming to be really frustrating and not my favorite thing to do. I do videos, etc., but I have such a heavy workload with clients right now, but I'm thinking about and planning out what I'm going to do on websites. And so I'm not leaving YouTube or anything, but I just think there's a lot more that I could do. But yeah, maybe a website going back where I began in 1995, at least more so than here and whatnot. Social media drives me crazy, really does. I don't think by and large it's that healthy at all. So, and the channel recently has grown a bit, but you know, hey, I'm never going to see 100,000 or 200,000, nor would I ever want to, because I know that there are lots of good YouTubers in the genre area who are in that range, right? And for talking about narcissists, etc., in particular, more so. And you know, good on them. It's just that there are certain things you have to do, and to me, those are compromises I won't make, because it's not. I'm not saying they're unreal. There's a few I really super respect. So yeah, I have to be careful what I say with that. But the more people, some people grow channels because I believe a few of them are just really fantastic people. And then in this area, and then some people grow them for other reasons, and I don't know what they are. And the point being, anyway, is some people just maybe are social climbers and whatever that might entail, but it's not my bag anyway. I don't care about that. Um, oh, I'm glad that was helpful, Jane. Sarah, and unless you have years to stay with the BPD while they get treatment and develop emotional intelligence, which is only just one part of the process, but yes, you should take care of yourself and leave. Well, absolutely, because that's just not a good investment for people when it really takes 8 to 16 years. And that's a quote from Dr. John Gunderson. So that's not, a lot of what I'm saying comes from pioneering, clinicians. It's not like I just decide, except for I guess I go on about the APA a lot, but there's a reason for that too. Um, and Jane, so strange with people with BPD. In two cases in my close environment, those people would, every few years, have moments of complete clarity, realization, self awareness, and the stone wall coming down, and then it would disappear again. Well, yeah, and that's really got to do with the fact that when they have some awareness and clarity, they can have those moments, but they don't have a stable self or identity from which to be able to hold that. And then secondarily, what they know intellectually or become aware of in the mind doesn't speak to the emotional landscape at all, and doesn't lead to like a jump in behavior change. Would that it would be that simple, but it isn't. So I think a lot of people make the mistake with family members in the around and around splitting cycles of it all. With an ex, maybe people go back and think, well, because they come back and they hoover and they're like, well, I'm going to go to therapy, and some might mean it, and most don't, and or they'll go and then they'll quit, but they have some point of awareness that in that fleeting sense of, while they're telling you, it gives people false hope, and then they try again, and but like, whoops, no change, and because that takes years in therapy, and then they're coming around the cycle again to however the relationship ended in the first place, and all the pain all over again. So then you're absolutely describing what happened in my relationship. Every once in a blue moon, a ray of light. Oh, that's why I stayed, but it always goes away sadly. And it goes away largely when they are triggered again, and the immediacy of the dysregulated emotion and what goes with that for them, the pain and everything that they're feeling that they have no reference for because of the loss of self and because of what happened in early childhood. They have to externalize it as fast as possible. It's a survival mechanism. So I'm not defending the way in which people with BP will externalize that in adulthood and hurt others. But that's why when they have an awareness, and it takes a series of many different awarenesses to come to understand, to hold on to. But you have to be in therapy to be finding the lost self in BPD, or nothing sticks. Imagine, if you will, that you cook pasta, and some people like could throw pasta on the wall to tell if it's done, if it sticks, right? Imagine for people with BPD, they're cooking pasta and there are no walls. If the only way, which it's not, but if the only way to measure if pasta was cooked or not was to throw it up against the wall, people with BPD are like maybe having an awareness here and there, but like comparing that to pasta for a minute, there's no wall to throw it up against. There's no wall to see if it sticks or not. There's no identity there for them to take it any further on their own or understand it or hang on to it. And so Jane said, I have thought about it a lot. I don't understand this phenomenon. It's like they temporarily reconnect with their authentic selves. No, they really don't. They don't. They temporarily make a connection to a fragment of self. And yes, it's it's fleeting and it's very unstable. And Tanya, my BPD loved one, says he looks in the mirror every day, self-aware of how destructive he can be. Okay, but that doesn't sound like it's very detailed, right? It just sounds like he looks in the mirror and sees himself in a very negative light from shame wounds and other things, and has an understanding of something, but there's a lot. It's pretty vague, that. Like it's not gonna change behavior. That's the sad truth about that. Tanya, but he is helpless to do it. Best he can do is tell himself not to be an a-hole to people today. Well, and even that, given the right or the wrong circumstances, depending how you look at it, and when he re-experiences things that are the triggers are within these people, it's not other people's responsibility how they get triggered, then until he gets triggered, that might work. But that alone will not stop him from reacting in typical fashion, pattern fashion, repetition compulsion fashion when triggered. You might be given one, but then people have a choice. What's it given for? What do you think? You can make up your own mind. I mean, not necessarily with a physical illness, but certainly with BPD. Johan, why does a BPD keep saying they are worthless and that people like them should not exist when everything and everybody around says the opposite? Because it goes back to what happened in childhood. It goes back to the shame wound and the abandonment and attachment difficulty or more. And most people with BPD have really strong inferiority complexes. And most people with BPD feel like they are what you would scrape off the bottom of your shoe. And so then they have overcompensatory defenses against that at times when they present differently, which can be within BPD. Doesn't mean they have to be a narcissist too. So it's because they really don't know themselves, don't have a self, and they feel horrible inside, basically. Oh, you're very welcome, B Blueberry. Well, to that Franny B Cranny, yeah, there is a lot of negativity out there about BPD, and I would say, unfortunately, some of it isn't undeserved, but it might go overboard. All people with BPD aren't the same, but I think most people with BPD at some point or other will struggle with the truth. just in terms of defense mechanism alone. Many with BPD might be manipulative in certain ways and don't realize it, but not everything that a person with BPD does is manipulative. And as for empathy, well, it's not that people with BPD don't have empathy, but it gets suspended in a heartbeat when they're triggered. And he said it makes you wonder if you actually have BPD because you're extremely empathic. You might be extremely empathic, but depending on whether you've had enough treatment yet to be able to stop certain reactions to others, if you get triggered or if you still experience emotional dysregulation, you may or may not realize to what extent your empathy might be suspended in those moments. So that's that happens to people with BPD. But and then sometimes many people with BPD, and I'm not saying this to you personally, I don't know you, and not all people are the same, but many people with BPD believe they're really empathic when in fact it's like it's more of a not really empathy, but it's more not that people with BPD have the capacity for empathy, but they more self-empathize more than they realize than not so much other. Because when they're triggered, when they get into defensive modes and defense mechanisms, it's about survival on a psychological level at that point, knowingly or unknowingly to people with BPD. So empathy gets suspended. And then when people are yelling and screaming at somebody else because they're externalizing out what they're feeling with BPD, doesn't look too empathic, really. Tanya, I have no social media. Oh, I envy. That must be delightful. And you said you sleep very well. Yes. Franny Bucranny, and don't try to hurt anyone by being manipulative or a liar. Well, some people with BPD know they're doing that. Many people with BPD don't know they're doing that. But don't try doesn't. Okay, so going back to this whole thing about try. Trying isn't doing, and this is where I'll go back to what words actually mean and why they're important to be taken for what they mean. So when you say that people with BPD don't try to hurt anyone by being manipulative or a liar, that might be the intent or what the person with BPD perceives, but that's not how most people perceive most people with BPD in their experience. So sometimes for people with BPD, there can be a lack of, not, depends whether treated or not, a lack of awareness as to how one is impacting and affecting other. Victor, hey there, just got told my ex is celebrating our divorce on her social media. Oh. She left me for another dude, but she damseled and lied about me, smeared false allegations. Now I know she's BPD. I was devastated. I'm so sorry to hear that. And especially celebrating your divorce. It's like, I'm sorry that, whoever told you that, oh, you said you just got told so whoever told you that didn't do you a favor, because if you've got her blocked, etc., then you need to talk to the source of who told you, because, if you blocked her, it's so that you don't find that stuff out, right? And then you said that's got to be BPD, right? Splitting so bad. Well, there's that, yes, and then there's the behavior on social media. I don't know how many people, maybe there's a reason in a different context, but if they were celebrating a divorce, I don't know. But I don't know how many people without BPD would be doing that kind of thing by lying about, their ex and of course smearing false allegations. That's something that likely somebody, even if they didn't have BPD and were in some manner or fashion celebrating a divorce, no, that they wouldn't be doing that. So, Franny be cranny, I feel I could never have a relationship again. Well, I think many people with BPD are realizing that, but it doesn't mean that you should never have one again. What it means is seek more treatment and get more healing and learn more about how to relate to yourself more and other people, because that's possible.